The most dangerous man in Oakhaven wasn't the one holding a gun, but the one who offered to hold your hand while you cried. In the year 1952, that man was Elias Thorne. With his neatly combed silvering hair and a voice as smooth as velvet, Elias was a man of standing. He was the local clockmaker, a profession that demanded extreme patience and a frighteningly sharp eye for detail. While others saw a clock as a simple tool to mark time, Elias saw a universe of tiny, interlocking gears. He understood how one small, bent tooth on a cog could eventually bring the entire mechanism to a grinding halt. It was a skill he didn't just apply to timepieces. He applied it to the people of Oakhaven. Everyone in town loved Elias. He never forgot a birthday and listened with such intensity that you felt like the only person in the world. His porch light was a beacon, always burning for anyone who needed a steady hand. He was the town's pillar, the safe harbor in every storm. However, beneath that polished exterior lay a predator who didn't hunt with teeth, but with trust. His first focus was Clara. She was a young widow, drowning in the silence of her home after her husband's sudden passing. Every day was a battle to keep her grocery store from sinking into debt. She was exhausted, her eyes rimmed with the redness of fatigue, and her spirit was dangerously close to breaking. She was the perfect subject for Elias's unique brand of kindness. Elias didn't offer her a loan or help with the heavy lifting. Instead, he offered her something far more addictive, a witness to her pain. He would visit her kitchen, the fading sun casting long shadows across the floor. He would nod slowly as she confessed her deepest fears, that she was failing her children, that the store was a sinking ship. He called her the strongest soul he knew, a lie so sweet she couldn't help but swallow it. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. In those moments, Clara didn't realize she was exposing her soul. She only felt the warmth of a man who finally seemed to understand her weight. While Clara found solace in his empathy, Arthur found a brother in his silence. Arthur was a middle-aged man whose life was slowly dissolving in the bottom of a glass. His marriage was a battlefield of bitter words, and he felt like a ghost walking the streets. To everyone else, he was just a drunk. To Elias, he was an opportunity. Elias would find him at the diner, sitting on his usual corner stool. He didn't lecture Arthur or look away in disgust. Instead, Elias shared stories, inventing tales of his own struggles and secret shames. He created a false bond of brotherhood, making Arthur feel they were the only ones who truly understood the world. Elias was a master of subtle mirroring. When Clara sighed in exhaustion, Elias would let out a soft, sympathetic breath. When Arthur's voice rose in frustration with his wife, Elias's face would harden in shared anger. He became whatever they needed him to be, reflecting their emotions back until they could no longer distinguish his voice from their own intuition. But late at night, the velvet voice fell silent. Elias would sit alone in his workshop, surrounded by the ticking of countless clocks. He wasn't repairing a watch. Instead, he sat under a lamp with his leather-bound journal. With the cold precision of a scientist, he recorded every detail. He wrote down Clara's fear of being alone and Arthur's deepest inadequacies. He documented every fracture in their spirits he had uncovered. Every word of comfort had been a probe to find their breaking points. Every kind word was a secret investigation into their souls. He was mapping the geography of their pain for his own dark purpose. Elias started the next phase of his design with the surgical precision of a master clockmaker. One afternoon at the grocery store, while pretending to help Clara restock heavy crates, he leaned in and lowered his voice. He mentioned, with a look of practiced concern, that he had overheard members of the town council talking. They were worried, he claimed, that Clara was becoming unstable and might no longer be fit to manage the store. The lie was a master stroke. Clara's heart hammered. Suddenly, every customer felt like a secret informant. His eyes, usually warm, held a flicker of something sharp and cold as he watched the color drain from her face. When a neighbor offered a simple inquiry about her health, Clara no longer heard kindness. She heard a test. She began to retreat into the shadows, pulling the shutters of her life closed until the only light that reached her was the one Elias allowed to filter through his narrative. Simultaneously, Elias worked on Arthur. Over a quiet drink in the dim corner of the diner, Elias sighed over the tragedy of Arthur's marriage. He told Arthur that it was a profound shame his wife couldn't see the man of character he truly was. He planted the seed of doubt. "She doesn't see your inner strength, Arthur," Elias whispered. "I think she's actually embarrassed by you." Arthur, already raw with inadequacy, felt the sting of those words like a physical lash. He began to see every request from his wife as an insult, and every silence as a judgment. The manipulation grew complex as Elias began forgetting to deliver messages or misquoting the townspeople. He told Arthur that Clara had been gossiping about his drinking. Conversely, he told Clara that Arthur was making crude remarks about her mourning. He was systematically pitting his victims against one another, ensuring that their only common ground was the ground he stood upon. They were becoming isolated islands in a vast sea, and Elias was the only bridge left standing between them. By the time the winter winds rattled the windows of Oakhaven, Elias had become their absolute emotional anchor. When Arthur stumbled home, fueled by whiskey, it wasn't his wife he called. It was Elias. When Clara woke from a nightmare, she dialed the clockmaker at 2 a.m. He was always there, feeding their insecurities with the steady rhythm of a metronome. Then came the softest trap. Elias suggested that Clara sign over partial control of her finances. "Just to take the weight off your shoulders, dear," he said with fatherly warmth. Clara, so tired she could barely think, signed the papers, believing she was finally safe. The physical toll was impossible to ignore. Clara grew gaunt, her dresses hanging loosely off a frame that seemed to shrink. Her eyes were wide and darting, fueled by constant anxiety. Arthur became increasingly aggressive, a wounded animal lashing out at shadows. They were shells of their former selves, held together only by the desperate need for Elias's approval. The vibrant Oakhaven community now seemed distant and grey to them. Then came the letters. Arthur found an anonymous note detailing every one of his failures. It broke what little spirit he had left. Later that evening, Elias walked past Clara's house in the moonlight, sliding a similar envelope into her box. He was the source of the fire he was pretending to put out. The tension reached a fever pitch when the local sheriff started asking questions about a missing person from a neighboring town where a man had also been a close friend of Elias. Yet, Elias handled the lawman with such calm grace that the sheriff ended up apologizing for the interruption. The manipulation had bypassed the law entirely, leaving the town's protector looking like a saint while he prepared his iron gears for the final strike. Arthur's world imploded on a Tuesday afternoon. The whispers Elias had planted about his wife's infidelity and the town's mockery reached a boiling point on Main Street. Arthur, fueled by gin and sleepless nights, cornered the local baker, accusing him of things that existed only in Elias's twisted stories. The scene was grotesque. Arthur screamed at shadows until the sheriff pinned him to the brickwork. By sunset, his reputation was ruined. His wife, unable to endure a man she no longer recognized, packed and left before the moon rose. Arthur sat in his empty house, the silence ringing, waiting for the only person he believed still loved him to come and offer help. For Clara, the end was quieter. She sat in the back office, staring at legal documents that had transformed from lifelines into nooses. The realization hit with cold finality. The papers Elias had encouraged her to sign were a slow-motion theft. Her accounts were drained, her title voided, and the store that had been in her family for generations was declared insolvent. There was no one to blame but herself, or so Elias made her feel. When the bank arrived to lock the doors, Clara was found on a bench in the square with one suitcase and the realization that her savior had bled her dry while smiling at her table. Desperate, Arthur stumbled toward the clockmaker's workshop, seeking the velvet voice that had always provided a soft place to land. He found Elias sitting behind his workbench, the rhythmic ticking of clocks providing a heartbeat for the room. But when Elias looked up, the warmth was gone. His eyes were as flat as river stones. When Arthur began to sob, pleading for help, Elias didn't offer a chair. Instead, he checked his watch with mild annoyance. He told Arthur, in a tone bone-chillingly polite, that it was best if he didn't return. People were talking, and Elias had his own reputation to consider. He couldn't be seen with a man who had lost his mind. The look in Arthur's eyes was the sound of a soul shattering. In the sterile workshop light, the veil was lifted. He saw the precision of the trap. The man who had held his hand while he cried was the same man who had tied the knots. Elias wasn't a friend. He was an architect of misery who built a monument out of Arthur's failures. Arthur backed out, the mechanical ticking sounding like mocking laughter. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. There was no strength left for rage. Days later, Clara boarded a bus heading west, her eyes hollowed by betrayal. She didn't look back as Oakhaven faded. Arthur was found weeks later in a cramped boarding house. He spent his days staring at walls, refusing to speak or make eye contact. He was a man who had learned that trust was a weapon, determined never to be wounded by it again. Elias didn't care for the money. He viewed profit as a byproduct of a much more rewarding craft. At auction, he bought Clara's store for pennies, his face a mask of somber civic duty. He didn't intend to reopen it. Within a month, he hired a crew to tear the building down, watching as the walls collapsed into dust. He wasn't building an empire. He was clearing the board. He wanted to see the void left behind. Weeks passed, and the scandal became a memory. One golden afternoon, Elias was in his garden, pruning roses. Across the street, a moving truck stopped. A young mother stepped out, looking overwhelmed, a child clutching her hem. Elias paused, his shears glinting. He looked like a safe harbor. He smiled, the same warm, trustworthy smile, and waved. He picked a single perfect rose and began to walk across the street to welcome them. He didn't want their lives. He wanted the satisfaction of watching them break, gear by tiny gear, until there was nothing left but the silence he created. Who is the person in your life that everyone thinks is perfect? And what are they writing about you when the lights go out?